5, 4. Alright, let's get started. In this video, we're actually going to start talking about the introduction to mixed strategy analysis. Specifically, we're going to be analyzing dominant strategies. And so, in order to do this in Tekken, there's going to be moments in which we come up into situations in which there's mixed strategies, or mix-ups, or some people even call them 50-50s, which we'll talk about in a future video why I'm against calling them 50-50s. But in this video, we're going to be talking about dominated strategies. So you see I switched up my partner to Dragunov because he has a very nice string which has a dominant strategy that we're going to be covering. And going over dominant strategies, strings are a little easier to kind of research compared to just out in the open. And so the two moves that we're going to be looking at is part of a string, which the first one looks like this. And it ends in a mid, so it's block, block, and then it comes out mid. So if we are ducking at all, we're grabbed, and then it does 45 damage. And then the second variation that he can do is he can throw out a low. And so if we are just holding back, we're swept by the low, and then damage commences. So what we want to do is, instead of looking at this as a 50-50 situation of should I block high or should I block low, which is, we'll show during analysis, it has to be a mid-low combination, because all other combinations there's going to be a dominant strategy built in of either just standing or crouching. And so let's jump into the numbers before we come back to see exactly how King can respond and have this dominant position. Alright, so now we are just pulled up a spreadsheet real quick. You can pull up a piece of paper if you want to follow along, because we're actually going to get down into numbers. So as I previously stated, this is the intro to mixed strategy analysis, and specifically we're going to be looking at dominant strategies. And so what we have here is a matrix form, which is called a normal form matrix. Since we're going to be using game theory, yes, from economics, game theory, we're going to be applying this to Tekken strategies. So before we can even build a game theory game, we need three things. Those three things are, we need, number one, players. This is very easy because in Tekken there's always two players, and we're going to mark this. Player 1 is on the left-hand side of the matrix, and then above it is going to be player 2. So we have our first checklist of what we have. The second one is we need strategies. Now, strategies are what our deciding variable is, or our deciding action is. In Tekken, we break it down into the most basic form of we have high attacks, we have mid attacks, and we have low attacks. And then for player 2 side, just very introductory, we can either be standing or we can be crouching. And each one of these is going to have a different payoff. And that's the third thing that we need. We need to actually have payoffs for all of our strategies for all players involved. And so I'm going to just fill in numbers and then help you identify what is going on. So what I've done is just filled out this matrix. What we have in blue in all these, on this kind of column, these are all the decision and payoff variables that we have for player 1. And so we've modeled it right after Tekken. So for instance, if we are going to do a high attack and our opponent is standing and he's just going to block, we're going to register that as 0 because our opponent has taken 0 damage. However, if we chose high and our opponent chose crouching because they're going to punish us later, so we do a high attack, and before we fully recover, they're going to punish it, we're going to record this as a negative number. And now you might be wondering, why is there a positive 2 here? This is to show the incentive for your opponent to do that. We call this a zero-sum game. And it just shows more incentive for your opponent to do a certain action. That's why in each of these payoff matrices, you're going to see the exact same values but the inverses. So we have positive 2 and negative 2, -1 and +1, and so on and so forth. And just like in Tekken, so high attack, if you're just standing, it's a block of 0. If it's a medium attack and you're standing, you do 0 damage. And if it's a low attack, because you're standing and you're not guarding your feet, you're going to take some damage. And kind of the same thing of just the crouching. High attacks, as I just covered, you're going to get high crushed. Medium attacks, you're going to punish your opponent who's crouching, so you're going to do 3 damage. And if you do a low attack versus a crouching opponent, they're going to be able to counter attack. So this minus damage meaning player 1 is going to be losing hit points. This is something to very clearly see, but now that we're looking at this matrix, we need to see, is there a dominant strategy that we can do here? Or are there any strategies that are strictly dominated by others? And while we could do the analysis in this matrix, what I've done is I've kind of broken it down into a few other matrices to kind of show what we're looking for down here. And we'll revisit that top matrix in just a second. So the first case that we have is we're only looking at high and mid options. And how we analyze this is we're going to, from the player 1 perspective, we are first going to analyze if player 2 is going to do a standing attack, is doing a high attack better or a mid attack better. So what we do is after we select the standing, we're going to analyze this entire column and only the payoffs for our decision variable. In this case, they're both 0, so we are indifferent of how to respond to when the opponent is going to be standing. We're going to use the exact same logic, and now we're going to assume that our opponent is going to be crouching. If we do a high attack, they're going to be able to high crush us, so we have a -2. But if we do a mid attack, we will be able to do 3 damage. And so if our opponent is crouching, we will prefer to do a mid attack in that scenario. And we can also just draw this arrow back and forth is how I usually indicate it, meaning we're indifferent. But we can see just from here that for player 1, we almost always want to do a mid attack. Now we have to look at it from player 2's perspective. We've already done the analysis of player 1 wants to do a mid attack over a high attack, so how will player 2 respond? And all we have to do now is compare this -3 and 0. Clearly, player 2 doesn't want to lose any health, and so they are going to want to just stand. And what we have done here is we have actually drawn out a Nash equilibrium. This means that in almost all the states, the best response for player 1 based on player 2's actions and the best response for player 2 based on player 1's actions is going to come up to this equilibrium play. And as we know, if the game is already decided, there isn't much of a gain here and there isn't a lot of mix-ups. So let's go on to the next instance in which we're looking at a high attack and a low attack. And we're going to follow the exact same logic, but at a little faster pace. So we're going to be looking at, if we're assuming player 2 is going to stand, we want to do a low attack because 2 is greater than 0. And if our opponent 2 is going to be crouching, we want to do a low attack because even though we're losing health, we're losing less health than if we did a high attack because that high crush is more damaging. But now we've solved for player 1 always wants to do a low attack. So if you are player 2, you want to decide if you want to do a crouch or if you want to stand. 1 is greater than -2. And so in this case, we found another Nash equilibrium that in a high-low mix-up situation, crouching is going to be at least a weakly dominant strategy between those two options. And then finally, our final one is we're looking at if player 1 is either doing a mid attack or a low attack. Following the exact same logic, if player 2 is going to stand, player 1 is going to want to do a low attack. If player 2 is going to crouch, we want to do a mid attack. And so we look from here, and because we don't have both arrows pointing in the exact same direction, we already know that we're going to have a mixed strategy for at least player 1. Now player 2 is going to observe that player 1 wants to decide, well, sometimes I'll do a mid, sometimes I'll do a low. And we see that also for player 2, sometimes they want to crouch if we know the opponent's going to do a low attack, or we want to stand if they're going to do a mid attack. And so what this situation calls for is that there is no Nash equilibrium, and that this is a mixed strategy. In another video, I'm going to cover how to calculate these mixed strategies to find the optimal distribution of mid attacks to low attacks. But again, we're just focusing on identifying dominant strategies, which pulls us to the final situation in which I'm going to pull it back to the gameplay, and then we're going to come back to the numbers and see how we can use these matrices to solve the problem. Okay, so now we're back in the game, and just to review, we're going to actually pick up some information. So Dragunov's first one is going to be a low hit of 24 damage. So that's the value that we are going to be using for if we are standing and he does his low variation, he's going to score 24 points. His other option is if we are crouching, the final mix-up is going to do 45 damage. And so we are going to record that under his mid option of what to do. But now for King, we need to see what are we going to do if we block this mid option or block this low option. And so if we block, we have enough time to do a hop kick, and we can establish that this is a punish. And so if we stand, we have enough time to punish this mid attack with a hop kick and do 76 damage. If we block low, we will be able to do 74 damage. So these are the values that we're going to use in our spreadsheet. But there's one final thing, because this video is called Dominant Strategies. There is an option that King can do, and nearly every character can do with this mix-up, which is dominant over all other options. This is the most damaging to do at 79 damage if he's doing his mid variation. And we can hit him with the exact same combo if he's doing the low variation. So even though this is a mid-low mix-up, it is a dominated strategy for King to do a delayed hop kick or a hop kick or something of that nature, which is a low crush, and it hits mid. So let's go back to the numbers and actually figure this out to kind of finalize today's episode. So now we're back to the spreadsheet. What I've done is I filled in the numbers that we talked about in the associated location. So under the mid option for Dragunov, if we're standing, it's going to be minus 67 for Dragunov, and then 45 damage if King is crouching. And then we have our third option of doing the delayed hop kick, in which Dragunov is always going to lose 79 damage. And we can analyze it the exact same way. So from player's one perspective, which is Dragunov in this case, if we know King is standing, we want to be able to do a low attack. If King is crouching, we want to do a mid attack. And then if it's up, forward, 4, we're kind of indifferent because it's equal to one another. So in this instance, for Dragunov's perspective, we can say, okay, we're sometimes going to do mid, we're sometimes going to do low. Now for King's perspective at player 2, we're going to do the exact same thing. So if Dragunov is going to do his mid variation, we can either, we're going to do 79, because 79 is going to be larger than kind of all of our other options. If Dragunov is doing his low variation, the exact same thing. We are going to be going with the up forward 4 variation. So what this means is that this column strictly dominates all other strategies, in which King, in this instance, will do nothing else other than this variation. He should not stand, he should not crouch, because this is going to be the highest damage output that you are able to do. And so, if you ever come across a Dragunov player who's trying to do this mix-up, you should know immediately as soon as Dragunov does that audio cue that he's going to either do a sweep or cancel sweep, that you should start your up forward delayed 4 and score that 79 free damage. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. Again, we covered dominant strategies and how to apply them into Tekken terms, as well as how you can start analyzing the game. We covered the 3 instances of different mix-ups, if it's a high-mid mix-up, if it's a high-low mix-up, and of course the true mix-up, which is a mid-low. So hopefully you learned a little bit something today, guys, and I know this is a little more analytical, a little more numbery, but this is kind of more of the theory of Tekken for how we realize how we should act. In a future video, we're going to be covering these mixed strategies and the proportion of how often you should do mids and how often you should do lows. But until then, we will see you guys next time. If you like what you saw, please hit that subscribe button and comment below. We'll see ya.